Start saying thank you for coming and Happy New Year to everybody. First of all, apologies. I know we have one apology from Councillor Davey and Councillor Dan is subbing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Item 2, delegation of interest. Anybody have any? No. Minutes from our last meeting held on the 1st of November. It seems such a long time ago. But is there any issues that need to be raised? No? Moving on very quickly. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Can I first start saying thank you for coming and Happy New Year to everybody. First of all, no?
No echo, no echo. Thank you.
Okay, apologies for that. There's nothing worse trying to hear my voice twice round. Okay, so we've done the minutes. Everybody was in agreement. Happy for me to sign those minutes? Yep. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 4, Chair's urgent business. There is one item I would like to raise. I would like to thank those who supported my request to start these meetings at an earlier time than published due to the darker evenings. By the time we have our next meeting, the evenings will be lighter. Therefore, I suggest that we return to the published time of 1500 hours. Once again, I would like to thank the Labour members who fully supported me as the only female member on this committee and would like to register my disappointment that the ruling group did not support my request and refused to attend the new times even though they did not object at the time at request. I have to say, when Labour regains control of this city in May, we can return to working cross-party and putting Plymouth first, not party politics first. So moving on to item 5, we have the Mayflower 400 update. So we just wait for our members to come in. Thank you. Okay, can I welcome you all, and again, can I wish everybody Happy New Year from down that end of the table from myself. We're looking at item number 5 on the agenda, which is the Mayflower 400 update. Councillor Jordan, are you going to lead this, or Councillor Boyer?
Yeah, I'm going to lead on this.
You're going. So would you like just to run us through very briefly, because I imagine everybody's read their papers.
Certainly.
Thank you.
We're bringing the scrutiny this update from the Mayflower 400 as we approach the 1,000-day countdown to the anniversary of the sailing in September 2020. But there is significant progress to create the full 12 months of events from November 2019 to November 2020. And indeed to level activities well in advance of 2019 and create benefits that will resonate well around all around the world and beyond in 2020. As you will already be aware, 2020 marks the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower's voyage, one of the most influential journeys in global history and a defining moment in the shared history of Britain, the United States and the Netherlands. The anniversary provides a special opportunity to inspire people across the nations with the story of the iconic voyage, exploring the themes of migration, tolerance, freedom and democracy that have such contemporary relevance today. The Mayflower 400 programme will ensure that Plymouth maximises the opportunity presented by the 400th anniversary of the journey of the Mayflower from Plymouth to the US in 2020, exploiting Plymouth's great natural and heritage assets. The programme will modernise the city and help stimulate an economic renaissance, attracting jobs and commercial opportunities. Alongside this, it progresses a transatlantic cultural celebration fit for a global audience. It will provide a legacy for the city as a first-class cultural destination, touching residents, friends, visitors alike for generations to come. The profile of Plymouth as Britain's ocean city has continued to be raised through the development of the Mayflower 400 programme, including marketing activities, events and consistent high levels lobbying within government in the UK and US. The Mayflower 400 partnership of destinations is becoming increasingly engaged in developing their own plans along the joint-up approach to large-scale cultural events and programming. The concept of a national Mayflower Trail has become firmly embedded and nationally, and working is ongoing to develop the associated projects. Engagement in Plymouth is increasing across the sector and communities with good progress in critical areas of capital progress and international marketing. Some of the key points and the milestones that we have achieved since 2016 is £500,000 secured from Visit Britain for the development of national Mayflower Trails in 2016. This has to be used for international marketing that has included high profile of Mayflower 400 and Plymouth at the majority of international trade travel events, with the travel trade such as that international tours to Plymouth are now being sold and booked. Capital business case for Mayflower project has been agreed and with a circa of £5 million. HLF grant bid was submitted in April 2017. Though the bid was unsuccessful, the work which went into creating the bid has been the basis for the national trail to be progressed anyway, and smaller bids to be submitted locally, and is attracting funding in other ways. We have met with the Secretary of State, Tourism Minister, DTI Minister, as well as also officers from the DTI and the DCMS. We are working closely with the Lord Lieutenant to secure a royal visit, as well as also £500,000 has been secured from Visit England from the Discover England Fund for American Connection projects, as well as also a number of other bits and pieces that we have been engaged in as well. So if you've got any questions to the team, I'll pass it back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jordan. Do we have any questions, members, please? Councillor Maven?
Thank you, Chair. Remember to speak my microphone on this time. Could I ask Councillor Jordan, reading through the document, I see you're open to encourage royalty to come down to the city within this event. Just noticed through that both the Lord Lieutenant's office and the Lord Mayor's office are not mentioned anywhere at all within this report. Have they been liaisoned with? Because I thought protocol said that wherever royalty was involved in the city, then the Lord Lieutenant's office should be involved in that fully.
You're right, and I believe that yes, they have been. They're involved in this, but it's like a lot of these things with when we're trying to attract royalty to come to events. It does take an awful lot of time and an awful lot of negotiation, and we probably won't actually know until a lot closer to the event who's going to come down, if anybody at all. But we need to start that process now, and that's what we're trying to do, and we use every avenue we can.
And you're happy that both those departments, both the Lord Mayor and the Lord Lieutenant's office, have been involved?
Yes, so I asked Charles Hackett if he could just help on that one.
Yes, we're definitely working very closely with the Lord Lieutenant's office. That's the only route at the moment that we're talking directly to the royal families and to their offices. Meeting with the Lord Mayor's office next week to bring them into that, but at the moment the conversation has primarily been to the Lord Lieutenant in terms of a kind of wider patronage, including those visits, and that's what we've been doing so far. And we're working, as I say, to meet with the Lord Lieutenant, the Lord Mayor office to bring them into that loop. We're also triaging across the requests that our US partners have, because they are very keen to get a visit as well over to Massachusetts. Just trying to make sure that those things are done in a coordinated way through the Lord Lieutenant.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Morris.
Thank you. Couple of money questions, three. First off, have we had any feedback on why the Heritage Lottery Fund bid was unsuccessful? Because this seems like a blindingly obvious thing for the Heritage Lottery Fund to support.
Yes. So we got feedback earlier last summer in 2017 on the bid that we put in. In the run-up to putting in that bid, we'd had advice from the officers within HLF that the best approach was to collate a single bid to make sure it was a coordinated single application. In the event at the actual national meeting, they were oversubscribed to such a huge amount that the amount that we were asking for, they said, was too large a sum in the total of that picture. So we would have been asking for 20-25% of their total award that they subsequently actually had at that time frame. So the advice they've given us is to go back location by location, which shifts the level of work and where we deal with the complexity. So we now need to deal with the complexity in making sure the individual locations applications tie up into a totality, but doing it through that way rather than doing it as one large bit. That was the main feedback. There was no sort of feedback saying that this wasn't something they supported. Myself and Adrian Vink and the chairman went to meet with the chief executive and the operations director in London nationally, and they see this as an important point. They're encouraging us in our local and regional conversations to apply, and subsequent to that, there have been successes in the different regions of the sort of sub-parts of that overall bid, and we've got, particularly in our capital programs, subsequently going to be and are submitting to them over the coming months. Does that sort of answer the question, or was there something?
Yeah, I get the feedback. So we're going to be putting in other bids to the HLF.
Yes, so we've got a number of bids going in. I think they're detailed in some of the capital projects here, around the historic houses, around some of the trail work, and triaging other smaller projects in for a number of smaller bids. And in the other locations, some bids have already been successful that were held back. The national bid went in, the work from that they could then rapidly submit and get some of those.
And then finally, if those, I mean, how critical are those bids then? I mean, if those bids are not successful, does that mean that something doesn't happen?
I suppose the big bid would have given us an easier way of coordinating centrally, because it gave us some central capacity at the national level, and now we've got to manage that. So one of the things that doesn't happen automatically and takes more effort from each of the locations is to actually align to be consistent. But in the 6 months since getting that negative feedback, we've, I think, achieved most of that. And if you go on, you'll see the virtual trail stuff starting to appear. So that the educational part of that pack is something we don't have subsequent funding for at the moment. We have activity going on here in Plymouth, but a sort of an outreach program that goes beyond that is something, therefore, that's on the to be funded list. So that is a gap. In terms of the capital infrastructures in Plymouth and in most of these locations, other funding sources and the council are a key funder into that, which we're then taking into matching in smaller bids. So the capital infrastructure in some places will not be as big, but it is coordinated, and the trail itself now exists and is being booked into. The education at a national level, we need to find other ways to support, and the infrastructure, capital infrastructure locally. In most places there's some capital funding, and in some key locations that are small but important in the integrity of the whole piece, those are really quite small bids. So we're supporting, out of my team, helping Dartmouth prepare their bid off a templated bid that we've prepared, so that they can get sort of 50,000 to make sure that they have a few markers along that overall trail.
And the second question, again talking about national funding, we got 500 grand out of the Treasury in the 2015 budget, which has basically been spent, and that marketing money that doesn't have funding earmarked from March 2018. What lobbying? I mean, are we getting our MPs to press Philip Hammond to bung us another 500,000 or $1 million or whatever? Because the marketing side of it obviously has to be done in advance. If we're particularly if we're talking about visits to Plymouth, people book up a year, 2 years ahead.
And as Amanda could give details, I suppose particularly on the international visits, we create the product, which is well advanced, but then we sell it, take it to a third party to take into the actual market. So we don't go directly to US consumers. We go to the trade and they take it on. We don't fall off a cliff because of the other project, the Visit Britain project that Amanda has created and secured, another $500,000 for, which Mayflower is a component, a key component, but only one component, but the product is already created, and that is a connections project, deliberately targeting US visitors and getting them outside London, and there are a couple of streams within that of which Mayflower is one of them. So that keeps, having created the product, that keeps the product into that promotion to an extent. But that's not really a question. Your question was the national government and are we lobbying? We are lobbying. We weren't successful in the obviously in the last budget, which was tight. I'm speaking to the chair of the all-party parliamentary group about getting that group together to make sure we've got a kind of political will piece. Certainly, our MPs are all briefed on it and had an outline of the budget and asked that we would need to make the absolute most of this. But that's one of the key tasks through the next 6 to 12 months. Is that political will at national level to see the national picture and what kind of uplift that can bring.
And come back on that. You mentioned the APPG. Which one?
There's an APPG for Mayflower 400, but it didn't actually meet last year. It met the year before, and therefore it's kind of been key that gets together.
Who's chair of that?
John Mann is chair of that. Passive law.
Okay.
Can I ask some other people to come in and then come back to you, Councillor? Is that okay? Councillor Fletcher, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I was just looking at the key matters to address in 2018, and I just wondered about visitor capacity and what discussions have taken place with your colleagues across the pond with regard to visitor thresholds in the city and accommodation plots and the like.
Sure. Are you talking about hotel capacity in Plymouth specifically?
Yes.
Yeah, and visitor number anticipated.
The fact that I think I might have saying there are something like 10 million direct descendants from the Mayflower. Quite obviously, not all of those are going to be coming across. But you know, what is the plot to try and?
Well, if I can, I'll say a few things about hotels, and perhaps if I can invite Amanda to talk about the visitor analysis and the numbers. She spent a huge amount of work on that with Visit England and Visit Britain and that analysis. But on the hotel stock, I remember last time we were here, I was asked about will we ever have enough hotels to hold every visitor, and I think the answer was no. And I remember the headline that was picked up was we might have floating hotels, and there might be. Actually, I think the story since then has got a lot better in terms of our hotel stock. So I think we're starting to see some progress. It'll never be enough for a spike like Mayflower. It's very hard to plan for a single spike that's once in a generational event. But I think our direction of travel and hotels is really strong. So I mean, there's hotels being built as we speak for the first time in a very long time. So Derry's Cross is on site, which is really great. We're really hopeful that Mill Bay will have a hotel on site in time for Mayflower as well. There was an announcement last week about a smaller boutique hotel in the Royal William Yard, which is really great, and we're working closely with Urban Splash on that. And of course, our direct intervention ourselves that we've made over a number of administrations of 1620. So I think those are probably the capital projects in train now. It's unlikely with the lead-in time we're going to get new hotels, although I think there is potential for one more in the private sector that could come forward, but I think that's the stock we have. So what we then have to do is work out the difference between the stock we will have, the surrounding areas, how we manage the peak seasons, of course, and the visitors over a 12-month period, not just in peak. So it's how the program's split. And I think as the programme firms up, we'll get a much clearer picture of that. But I think with Chair's sort of permission, it'd be worth just giving Amanda the opportunity to say a few words about the visitor numbers and the work she's been doing nationally.
Amanda, could you just put your mic on, please? Thank you.
It's that one, isn't it? Sorry. Everything that David has said is absolutely true. We are estimating, or at least we hope, we'll gain at least an additional 500,000 visitors during the Mayflower year. Our normal visitor numbers are just around 5 million visits per annum, but only a small amount of those are from overseas visits currently. We only have 1% of our visitors from overseas currently, so it's not a huge amount. And obviously we're keen to grow that. So we do need additional accommodation for those overseas visitors to stay. And those are the ones who will spend more money. They're much higher value visitors. And so because of the lead-in times for that market, it's a minimum 2-year lead-in. That's why we're currently marketing to America now, to get people here for 2020. Excuse me. As David explained, we also have so we have about 2,000 beds in the main city area. And then we have about another 2,000 in the sort of up to sort of 20-minute sort of drive time around. And then obviously we have the wider stock. So that will fill out in a ripple effect. The alternatives that we're looking at the moment to help support the demand at peak times are additional campsites, so encouraging private sector to expand existing campsites, exploring opportunities for temporary camping or campervan sites at key locations across the city, encouraging much to the disappointment probably of the accommodation providers, but encouraging people to explore things like Airbnb in a structured way. And there are some really good examples of best practice around that, linked into, for example, Hull City of Culture or the Commonwealth Games or some of the other larger major events. So really looking at all the different opportunities that we have. And as David said, we will get some peaks and some I can't say that, spikes. And the rest of Devon and Cornwall will very, very happily soak quite a lot of that up. So we are working with our partners in Devon and Cornwall because they see this as a big opportunity for them as well. So hopefully that helps.
It's very helpful, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Penberthy.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of different areas, but I'll begin by sort of picking up on neighbouring authorities. The Mayor of West Devon spoke to me at the Lord Mayor's Carol service, concerned that from his perspective, we weren't doing very much with our neighbouring authorities to maximise the opportunity, not just for Plymouth, but for our travel to work area. So he was saying, it's great if people come into Plymouth, we all know that that might mean a night or an overnight. What about working with authorities like mine? We're the gateway to a World Heritage Site. So are there ways in which we could be clever with this and exploit Plymouth as a centre for things that we're not actually part of, but we could do? So I did point him in your direction, but I think that whole thing of neighbouring authorities is something that we could build on to get more than just a night or two in Plymouth, but potentially stretch that to a third or a fourth night, by offering Plymouth as a centre for some of those other things. So my first question is, what are we doing with some of those smaller local authorities and parish councils around us? So Tavistock as a town council as opposed to a district or borough, for example, which could then lead us to more tourist nights in Plymouth and more ongoing tourist nights in Plymouth as we go forward.
So I'll partly answer this, and I think Councillor Bowyer will be able to answer as well in relation to the ongoing relationship with the leaders of the other authorities. In relation to visitor, we are already formally bound into a partnership with both Visit Cornwall and Visit Devon. You will know that both of those organisations are now community interest companies and therefore are not public sector led. And because of that, I'm mindful that there may be a slight disconnect between their local authority colleagues and how much information is flowing. So I think we just need to be mindful of that. But we are working very closely with Visit Devon and Visit Cornwall to market to the US market, and they are all linked into not just the Mayflower project, but also the American Connections project, which is the £500,000 Visit England funding project. Dartmouth are a key component of that, as you can imagine, linked into Mayflower, but also on the bigger American connections, the Cornish diaspora and the mining. All of those things are being woven into product to take to US market, not just for 2020, but as part of a legacy. So I can answer that from the visitor side of things, but I think Councillor Bowyer may be able to say a little bit more around the leadership connections as well.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, Chris, I've had conversations, obviously, with John Tucker, the leader at Southampton, given the connection that Amanda has pointed out with Dartmouth, clearly as a member of the Compact. I've also had a conversation and a meeting with the mayor at Torbay, who said that they would like to think that they could get involved. And I think it's important to remember that we are trying to lead the national UK national effort here, but there is a limit, obviously, to our ability to do everything. So we are trying to put in place an overall structure that allows others to contribute where there are perhaps gaps or where there are areas of expertise that they have that we don't, that they might be able to fill in. One of the thoughts of the mayor at Torbay was that, you know, would it be possible perhaps to organise some sort of sailing event, given the obviously the base of Plymouth with that, Torbay obviously would work. And so I've said to him, you know, you go away, have some sort of thinking done about what it is you may or may not be able to contribute and come back. So obviously the ball is in his court. I'll certainly pick up with Philip Sanders at West Devon. He hasn't come to me directly, and I haven't seen him for some while at leaders' meetings. For some reason he's not been there, so I haven't had much of an opportunity, but I'll certainly pick it up with him, because I am over in meeting the pair of them over in Southampton. I think it's later this month, so I'll pick that up.
Great, thanks a lot, and I appreciate the mayor might not be totally aware of everything that was going on. It was just, rather than them going off and doing their own thing linked to Mayflower, it would be much better if we did it together. Thinking back at our last meeting with you, we did talk about some of the negative perceptions on Mayflower 400 within Plymouth, and I know there has been some progress on that. The report doesn't mention any of that at all, and I think while it's good to hear all the positives, it's also important for us to appreciate some of the difficulties and some of the things ongoing from that. I just wondered whether you could bring us up to date with the state of play with those members of our community who feel that we're trying to rewrite history and obliterate parts of culture, and then where we might be going as we get closer to 2020 with that.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. It's a very good question, and something that's certainly been foremost in my mind. I suppose in the way we put it in the document probably doesn't bring it out particularly well. We've talked a bit about the kind of engagement process. And bearing in mind the sensitivity around history, around the tensions and, in the story of this, was one of the reasons, alongside actually, frankly financial, around the approach we've taken to engagement. So we haven't tried to push out a whole load of messages at people and tell them everything. We're doing it through a more cascade of engagement type way, which is why we've taken the approach of having closer dialogue with 50 initial organisations who are then going on, supporting them and equipping them into the next conversations. Now, I've met personally with a number of the groups that are have had the highest concerns around some of the educational materials or some of the history or the ability to include more challenging topics in today's society as well as the past. And actually, I wouldn't say all, but I'm pleased that most of those, as we've gone out with an invitation to take part in the overall programme, rather than a kind of a message of leave it to us, we're fine, an invitation to take part, to add to the programme, to bring up difficult conversations around slavery, around cultural clash, around colonisation, through the medium of either culture or art or historic or lectures or so forth. Once that invitation's out there, actually the response has been much more positive, and I've seen a real shift in the conversation that I'm in. Now, that's not to say that that's done. We have to keep that openness. We have to keep that invitation. Some of it will come back, and I'm sure some of it will come back in part because there will be things that people would like us to fund, but our funding directly is limited, but not because we won't include things on those topics. The other piece that Amanda and David have been more involved for longer and had more direct relationship with the Wampanoag in Massachusetts. But it was very important to me to go over there and meet with them and keep binding closer together that relationship. And there is I bring back from that a kind of an understanding and a message that there's a danger of well-intentioned hand-wringing here that is actually potentially patronising rather than giving them a platform to tell their own story. So one of the other key initiatives is their direct involvement or propagation of their own projects, so that their history, their story, their current situation, their kind of vibrant existing culture and where they are today is told by them, and that this is a platform for that rather than told by us or by other people sort of on their behalf, which I think is an easy well-meaning trap to fall into. Oops.
Thank you. And sort of unrelated, each year the UK nominates one city as its Pride City for the year. And I wondered whether we could potentially work with Pride in Plymouth to see how we could support them to secure Plymouth as the UK Pride City in 2020. That would attach not only a local but also an international tourist audience.
I agree, and we've started that conversation in the latter part of last year, in sort of October, November, with Pride in Plymouth, to start the conversation about what could be done here, but also to think bigger about making this a national place, but also maybe even to think beyond that. Other partners in this are locations that nationally you could link up, but also internationally. So Provincetown 400 is one of our partners over in Massachusetts, and Provincetown is predominantly, I believe, an LGBTI community, and actually a pride centre in that part of the world. So there's an opportunity to not only and a rationale for this to be the UK location for that, and certainly some applications we put into some of the funds and so forth, but we're willing to support that. So I think there is a conversation, I think almost to the political level, of how we can also bring any other influence to bear as we start the conversation with the UK Pride to make that the location.
Okay, David, did you want to come in on that point?
Chris, can I just come back to the first point very briefly about the wider community, because there's a bit that I've been involved in that I think might just be of interest. So in designing what has now become the national exhibition for Mayflower in the Box, I think people will be surprised about the depth of the narrative that has been developed for that exhibition. And I know we had a tour and you got to see a sense of that fairly recently. But I think I can reassure you that our ambition for that exhibition has just got greater. But also, I think we showed with a bit of co-curation with the main organised group who are worried that we're just telling one story of Mayflower. It's a global story, and they were I think reassured, surprised, pleased at the depth of our storytelling, and actually that, you know, this is a wider story of colonisation. It's a wider story of the Wampanoag and you know, what happened, but ultimately it's the story of how, you know, 100 pilgrims went into 50 million you know, Americans, and that story has many levels. So I was really reassured myself when they saw the storytelling, and instantly in that meeting all of that angst sort of evaporated, because there was a sense of a real sense of authenticity in that story. So I'm really excited to continue to develop that with the community, and the Wampanoag have a major part in curating that exhibition as well.
I was aware work had been going on. I think it's good that we've been able to publicly put that out there.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dan.
Thank you, Chair. My question is around the international communication bit, I think. You've said that next year we've got a priority to secure funding for international marketing. Amanda said that at the moment we have about 1% of our visitors are foreign travellers. So what do we intend that to be, hopefully, if this is a success? But it was something that Charles said about in the next 6 to 12 months. But if I'm an American, I don't think it's so bad if you're in Britain or in Europe. You're less likely to make your travel plans for 18 months hence. But if I'm an American, and you said there's also a risk that part of the Plymouth Connection project and stuff that we're doing with the 2 CICs, it might not focus so much on the Mayfair 400. Is this a risk? Because surely we should make sure that all our marketing material is out, not just to talk about, as in this international progress list in the next 6 to 12 months. One would hope that in 6 months it's out there. Because if it's not, you know, how do we manage to make sure that we're attracting those people early enough to get them here for next year? Because I'm assuming that those are the people you want to come here to buy lots of souvenirs to take home with them.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Dan. It's a really good question. Just to clarify, we received £500,000 in 2016 for international marketing activity, which is purely for Mayflower 400. So in October of that year, we recruited a national visitor project manager, a lady called Emma Tatlow, who has been working, over the past 12 months to develop all of the marketing activities that we need. That includes the Mayflower website, a brand new video that we have been developing, which will be taken to market in the US market, which showcases Plymouth and the other Mayflower destinations, photography, 10 itineraries which are linked into group and different types of groups in different geographic and thematic locations. We helped support the HLF bid application to develop the capital infrastructure for the National Mayflower Trail through some feasibility work which was funded by that project. And we have been marketing to the group and travel trade organisers for at least the last 12 months proactively. On the back of that, we have had over 40 familiarisation visits into Plymouth and across the wider UK, and we now see bookings coming in already from major international tour operators. Cuoni have taken the product in their marketing collateral for the forthcoming 12 months, as have Abercrombie and Kent, Select Travel and Tours International, to name but a few. So we're starting to see those products coming through and bookings coming in. And we'll continue with that activity until March. That's this March. We then, the Discover England Fund project then starts from this March and goes through to March 2019. And so a lot of the work that we've already done in terms of building a Mayflower product that we can sell to the international travel trade will continue. So, for example, there are trade shows coming up. We still have money and budgets for familiarisation visits. And the process effectively is we develop the product, we take it to market, we take it to the trade, they then put it into their brochures on their websites and they sell to their consumers, and their consumers then book it. And the trade will negotiate rates independently with our businesses and our accommodation providers. So we will make that introduction, we'll facilitate that, and then they'll negotiate the packages that they sell. So that work is well underway, and we're already getting some really good success. In addition to that, we've also started to promote to the cruise industry as well, and we've already seen some interest. We already have a booking for 2020 from a cruise company, and we have some bookings for next year for cruise on the back of actually proactively going out to market and sharing our potential. The other piece of work that we're doing is we're working with businesses in the city to encourage them to make their businesses bookable online, because the tour operators need to be able to see what's on offer, and they need to be able to physically book it, and our businesses are not geared up yet, so we've been doing some work business to business to encourage that. So hopefully that reassures you that there is activity in place, and the Discover England Fund project runs out at the end of 2019, but it is what they call a test and learn project, a phase 1 project, and the door is open for us therefore to go back and bid in for further funding rounds, and we do intend to do that.
Okay. Right. Councillor Morris, and that's going to be the final question. We're running over, Councillor Morris, so if you can make it quite brief, I'd be grateful.
Yeah,
Thank
it was
you.
about the Mayflower 400 Plymouth Community Fund. Because I think, you know, as we know, I mean, looking at the recent example of Hull, the really, really big success was in terms of community engagement, being City of Culture. And potentially, we have the similar opportunity for this. It was just a couple of things. I appreciate it might be quite early in the stage, but 160,000, the maximum amount a project can receive is 1,000, suggests that you're envisaging 160 community projects and bids, which is admirably ambitious. But if that were to succeed, this rather nebulous panel, which will be deciding which bids to fund, is going to have a hell of a lot of work on its plate. I'm also not sure how the money is accountable. I appreciate that POP is involved, which will help, but you know, there may be sort of groups who, you know, don't have a bank account, don't exist as groups, but want to do something one-off. And then finally, it says the fund will not pay for commercially run projects, which I'm not really sure what that means. I appreciate we're not going to be funding somebody so they can make a profit out of it. But on the other hand, you know, the business community may well have something which would be beneficial to them, to us, and to the whole of Mayflower 400. So, you know, the questions are fairly broad, but a bit of detail on that would be useful. I think actually in this report it says full details are provided separately, which may be referring to this report's presence in a different agenda pack.
So that is a type that will be provided separately, because actually it hasn't opened yet, and this is the initial outlines of those. The key issues, as you say, are about accountability, and particularly how you can actually triage that money to people who aren't organisations, because we do envisage this being a mechanism for wide participation rather than for usual suspects to be able to do something and get it here instead of get it somewhere else. We also, I mean, the 1,000 is a limit, can be removed by exception, but I suppose it's to separate it in some ways from the cultural fund or support we're giving to other organisations to make bids for grants for arts and those sorts of pieces, which for 5, 15, 20,000 should go to Arts Council, and this is sort of a unique type of pot of money for people to be able to get money to help have a street party, literally run a lecture or something very, very, very local. So there is going to, on the governance, that is a key balance that we're going to strike. We need to get right. How you govern it without stifling it and making it so hard that you can't do it. The Vital Sparks model, admittedly on a much smaller basis, is what we're looking at as the basis for doing that. And some of that pot is there. We may need to fund, to an extent, someone to manage that piece. And I don't want to drive that cost up at the same time. Don't want to lose the opportunity for individual wards, people to get permission and 50, 100, 200 pounds that could make them just get on with something that, for a change, isn't happening on the Hoe and is so. So I think you asked good questions about the detail. The governance and how we actually pay that through is a key kind of issue and has been handled to an extent within the Vital Sparks piece. So we need to work that model up. The full details of the model and the nimbleness of that committee. One of the pieces that we have discussed, though, is one of the trade-offs on this is you can't get that broad participation and drive high quality out of all of those. So some of these will just be won't be as good as others. And I think we're just going to make sure that the reporting of how many people got involved, what sort of event was it, how many people actually got involved, and be able to bring that back in so we know what sort of reach, because this is kind of gold dust money in some senses to trigger that, and therefore publicly. In terms of commercial, basically yes, we don't want to sponsor someone to make a commercial profit out of this, and therefore part fund someone's business or someone's time to do something that they would otherwise be doing as a business. Not to say that that we wouldn't. People couldn't pay people to do things. It's not as tight as
that. Can I just say, because I do think, despite the fact that this is quite a small amount of money in the overall scheme, this is actually really, really crucial in terms of making helping the people of Plymouth feel that they own this and that it is theirs. I wouldn't worry so much about some of the events being a bit naff, because I think it's it's a noble British trait to occasionally be naff, and I think also a correct balance does have to be made between obviously making sure public money is not misspent, but on the other hand, it's not at the same level of accountability as spending multi-million pounds doing something where the money is, misappropriated. It's not that sort of thing. It's sort of saying, well, go on, here's 50 quid, do it.
Which is why we took the decision to steer the amounts of money to be smaller, because rather than encourage people to come in for 5,000, because I think that shifts the balance of accountability that you need to put onto it.
Okay. So, thank you all for your questions. On page 20, we've got the recommendations. If I have support of the members, there's 2 more recommendations I believe that needs to go on. And to investigate a greater role for the Lord Mayor by engaging with the civic office as one. Then the next one would be more information on governance, structure, reporting and accountability when the committee is next updated. Do I have an agreement on those 2 added recommendations?
No, the second one, I'm not happy with that.
Right, okay.
Thank you. I don't see anything wrong with the present governance arrangements at all. Okay. The first that the Lord Mayor should have a greater involvement. Well, that's neither here nor there. I think the Lord Mayor will be heavily involved in whatever the celebrations are anyway. So if a recommendation needs to be emphasised that the Lord Mayor should be involved, then so be it. But the governance arrangements, I can't support that. I'm sorry.
Okay. So, I've had, the Vice Chair is in agreement. I take it you're in agreement with the first 3. Is in agreement with the next one. Can I have a show of hands for the first 3 and the first one with the Lord Mayor's office then, please? I've just suggested.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you put your mic on? Mic on first.
So, yeah, I'm not sure what Richard is objecting to. Could you read the bit out that Richard didn't like?
Okay, so the extra recommendation would be more information on governance, structure, reporting and accountability when the committee is next updated. Okay, so can I go back then? I have the first 3 recommendations. Councillor Maven, can you put your...
Yeah, I mean, I don't see anything wrong in that recommendation. And I'm sure the committee would agree to that as well. When you bear in mind this is cross-party working with regard to trying to deliver. This is about the city, and what the Scrutiny Committee is trying to do is just make sure that, you know, that everybody's covered all bases. And I think on that basis, in order to be able to do that, we need to look at, you know, the governance arrangements as well within that structure. There's no problem with that. That's not something that's either political or untoward. It's just a question of making sure that we're covering all bases for the good of the city. And that's all the recommendation is there for.
Yeah, just it's basically just asking for an update at the next meeting. That's what it is. I'm not going to break it down. It's a lot easier. Can I see a show of hands for the 5 recommendations that have been put forward to the panel today, please? Do we have support on the recommendations or not?
You saying all the
all of them?
recommendations?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So we have, can I just clarify that? That's obviously 5 and 2, 4. Those against, please, on all the recommendations. Okay. There's an alternative.
Chair, through you, Chair. So the Chair's put forward a set of recommendations with an additional 2. You've now voted against those. Is there an alternative motion which you wish to put forward?
Councillor Churchill.
Sorry, Nigel.
Sorry. No, I changed my mind. Thank you. Sorry.
Could you just explain what you changed your mind to? You're voting for or against?
I find it a bit bizarre, but I was just wondering whether we could have gone back to the 4, but obviously we've voted against that now.
Well, through you, Chair, you voted against the 5. If there's an alternative motion for recommendations for 4, excluding the 5th, you can vote upon that.
Do that.
Right, moved by Councillor Churchill. Those in favour of for the 4 recommendations as read out by the Chair, excluding the 5th, please show. Thank you, Chair. That's carried.
Okay. Thank you very much. Certainly going to be an interesting meeting. Can I thank everybody for coming and look forward to seeing you in the new year. Thank you very much for your time. Apologies we ran over slightly. Okay, let's move on now to item 6, please. No breaks today, Councillor Churchill. We're moving on. We've got quite a lot on the agenda today. Just giving people just a couple of seconds just to do a little bit of moving around. I could see you were struggling there. You were like drowning. I'm being told that we can crack on. Welcome Lou, welcome Mike. Can I wish you both a happy new year? I'm not ignoring the leader. I've already wished him happy new year. Apologies for running over, but obviously the Mayflower 400 is very important to us all as a city. The item we're looking at today is a controlled parking zone. Leader, are you actually going to lead with this one?
Yes, if I may, please,
so if
Chair.
I'll hand over to yourself.
Thanks very much. I'm here today this afternoon to try to run through details of a new and emerging policy that we want to bring forward, which builds on the current policies put in place in 2014 by the previous administration, but picks up what I think are changing circumstances that we're seeing in the city around parking generally. And the policy seeks to take a wider view, shall we say, of controlled parking zones in terms of their effectiveness going forward. My worry here is that if we leave the current situation that we have in terms of policy unchanged, there is a risk that we will eventually end up with essentially a pretty massive controlled parking zone covering most of the city, which is not likely. Well, I'm sure not. It simply won't work in the interest of all the stakeholders involved. The existing policy has quite rightly focused pretty much exclusively on the wishes of local residents. The new policy seeks to retain local residents' views and wishes at the heart of the policy, but seeks to widen and make sure that we take into account the views of local businesses, visitors, and other leading members within communities, libraries, and such like being a good example. So what we've put in place here is a summary in the papers before you of the background, the current position, which I don't propose to go through because I think we're all aware of them. I've tried to set out why I think it's necessary that we need to look at the wider impact of controlled parking zones as a policy, and then I would hope that we could concentrate on the proposals that this new policy seeks to incorporate. So at the back of your pack, I hope you will have got a sort of flow chart like this, which gives you the various stages, and where I think that perhaps if we focus just on the new elements of the policy, which I think is important. So the first one there is the second block, where we're describing that as a fact finding, so that when we get a request for a controlled parking zone, what we're proposing is that we take a more fundamental look and discover and establish with as greater clarity as we possibly can about exactly what is available in the area for which the controlled parking zone is proposed. So it looks at the amount of parking overall that's available both on street, off street, whether residents have driveways and garages, for instance, whether businesses in the area have do have access to parking, be it in council-owned car parks or in private car parks. We also want to and I think, look at the availability of public transport. I think that's important. And also we need to look at the level of parking occupancy in the area in question, not just at specific times of the day, but over 7 days a week. I think that's important, and I think that's a new step that we propose to introduce to establish exactly what the position is, so that that information can then be presented to, in this case, would be obviously the relevant cabinet member, who will need to make a decision whether to move to the next new component, if you like, of the policy, which is the highways impact assessment, where again we need to take another look, and I think the papers before you set out the detail of that highways assessment, which takes into account those more fundamental areas such as road safety, picks up the point I was making earlier around what other facilities in the area. It could be hospitals, medical centres, churches, leisure facilities. And once we've got that, then we are in a position then, I think, to have a really clear understanding of what is and isn't available within an area, and whether if those criteria are met, then we can then move onward, and basically after that point we would then move forward with what is largely the current policy with which we are all currently working and have been familiar with for the last three and a half years or more now. So that's what we want to do. I want to share that with members of the panel and ask obviously for views and reactions to that, because clearly I recognise that this is an issue that affects virtually everyone in the city, and by implication, therefore, it affects every member of this council, all of whom will get and have got over the time, and I'm sure will continue to get, queries from local residents focused on parking issues. And I think we're all familiar, and we've all spent considerable amount of time in our wards talking to residents about parking issues. So it seems to me that we do have to have a clear policy going forward, which, as I say, takes a wider view of controlled parking, and we don't get into a position where we've had in the past, where, for instance, a controlled parking zone has been implemented in one ward, which has almost instantaneously had an adverse effect on a neighbouring ward, and therefore all you're doing essentially is just sort of replicating the issues going forward as it spills and across the city and moves forward and move forward. So I'm trying to avoid that situation. So I think that's enough from me, just setting the scene. I've asked Lou and Mike to join me this afternoon to provide you with the more detailed and the more technical answers to the questions which I'm sure you will have.
Thank you very much, Leader. Questions? First one I've got is Councillor Churchill.
Brilliant, thank you, Chair. Just a financial query there, Leader. The highways impact assessment, how much does that cost to the council, please?
Can I ask Mike, would you have an idea of the cost of that?
There we go, try again. Thank you, Councillor. The highways impact assessment it doesn't involve us going out getting a lot of new information. It's a lot of using the information that we already have available, such as the proposed introduction of a CPZ that whilst providing a potential solution for some of the concerns raised by residents, we've already got the information data available to say how many schools, businesses, other facilities are there. And what we'd be looking at is, it'd be doing an assessment in that one instance there is, if restrictions came in there, what would so it was like a desktop assessment in that sense, what would be the potential impact on servicing those areas. There would be a small amount of time that we would invest on, for example, road safety is a new element we're proposing here, to do a road safety review to say, would a CPZ have a positive or potential adverse impact on road safety as well, looking at other factors. So I think what I'm trying to say is it's not so much adding a new cost. The cost more so would be an element of our time in doing that review, but it's not something we need to go out and buy in or anything. It's utilising data that we already hold and skills that we already hold.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm satisfied from that. It is somewhat different to the highways impact assessment that a developer would apply to the council for. Thank you.
Councillor Ball.
Thank you. A more general question. I mean, this paper is obviously brought about because there is a major car parking problem in the city. What alternative methods of finding parking space for the public are there, apart from just on street? I mean, I'll just amplify the point that quite often you'll drive along a street and you'll see cars nose to tail on the road and drives empty. And I can understand why this process might encourage more people to use their driveways. But are there other methods, like perhaps where there are wide pavements, that maybe those pavements could be used to improve or increase the amount of parking? Is there any study that has taken place or is planned just to see how much capacity could be increased by just looking at some of the wide pavements in the city and whether they could be used for public parking?
Thank you, Councillor Ball. I mean, I take the point you're making, and I think it's a valid one. I'd have to just perhaps condition that slightly to say that the cost involved of, for instance, of changing pavements, were there to be sufficient width to allow that to happen. I mean, clearly we'd have to take that into account. But I think, you know, where the policy is trying to meet the sort of thing that you're saying is that we feel it's not unreasonable to take into account when we look at the fact find stage, for instance, driveways and garages, because obviously you would hope that people would use those as a default option, clearly. But it may well be that the outcome of the fact find, for instance, suggests that we might be able to take out some double yellow lines that are not necessary or haven't served the purpose for which they were put in there, thereby freeing up more space. Now, I'm not saying that's going to be the outcome of every fact find, but it's certainly something that I would want to look at as part, as I say, of this wider and overall picture that we need to have of a particular area.
Okay, we've got quite a list, so if I just let everyone know so no one doesn't think I've ignored them. So we have Councillor Dan, Councillor Morris, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Mabin and Councillor Penberthy. So Councillor Dan, please.
First of all, I am going to register my disappointment that the portfolio holder isn't here to answer questions on this, because he's been extremely vocal in the press previously.
I need to say to you, Councillor Dan, he's currently on leave and not available for that very reason.
All right, but that's just an aside. Can I come back to resources, I think, for the time being? Having been 95% through a recent consultation on a CPZ in the East End on the old rules, where a lot of both council and officer time has been spent on that consultation. I will get to my question. I do know how time intensive the current process is. I find it strange to think that this new process won't be even more intensive, because at stage one, where you're doing the research, so when a councillor comes and says, I would like you to look at a scheme in whatever road or area, and then you do that fact find, that for starters is a complete new step, and it will need resource. And Mike, I know you said it's about capacity and time, but your team is already very much under-resourced, because trying to get any new CPZ resourced at the moment is nigh on impossible. So that's one question about resourcing. And then the second question is, so we've already wasted or could have wasted time on the current CPZs that are going through the system. It's like playing a game of football where you do half the, you get to half time and all of a sudden a new referee comes on and changes all the rules. So what happens for the CPZs that have already gone through, that have probably met both the old and the new roles? And then the third bit is, where is the public consultation on this process? Because it's, no, about this new process, full stop. Because the last process went all the way through scrutiny, everybody managed to have their say. This has just appeared out of nowhere. It doesn't seem to have had any consultation with anybody on what the new process will be, let alone whether we think it will be successful or not.
Well, first of all, I don't agree with your comments about consultation. I think if you look on the pack that's before you, for instance, the level of consultation is clear at all stages in that process. I'm not here to.
It's actually on the new process. Have we
yeah, I'm talking about the new process.
On the new one,
I'm talking about the new process. I'm not here to discuss the merits or demerits of the existing policy. It is what we have. It was put in place by the previous administration with the very best of motives. I'm not questioning that. But I really can't get into the state of progress of existing schemes. I'm here to talk about the new policy. If you want to talk about existing schemes, and I know that you have one in your ward, I'd be happy to meet you outside of this meeting, obviously, to talk that through. I'm just making the point that I don't think the current position, the current policy, is sustainable in the longer term. And doing nothing here is an awful cliche, but I think it needs to be said, doing nothing is not an option here. We really do have to refine the way in which we take this forward to allow everyone to have a say on policies, because what we're getting, and particularly with some of the existing schemes, and one in your ward is perhaps notable, is that, having got to the stage that you've just described, and I know it's a long and it's a tortuous process, and I'll come back to that in a moment, we reach a position where there is a division of opinion, more or less half people saying one thing and half people saying the other thing. So, we're as a council in a difficult position, and were we to reach that position with each and subsequent CPZ application, I mean, the whole thing become meaningless. So I do suggest that we do have to address that particular issue that you raised. But I really don't think my function here this afternoon is to discuss, as I say, the merits or demerits of the existing policy.
Sorry, Councillor Boyer, but I'm not talking about the consultation through the new proposed policy. I'm asking about what consultation has taken place to get to this process here in the first place.
That's the whole point of me coming here this afternoon, because it's become clear to my colleagues and I that the current policy is no longer fit for purpose. So therefore we are proposing a new policy. This is the first iteration of that, and I want to do this in an inclusive way where every member of the council has an opportunity to participate, and this is part of that process.
Okay. Councillor Morris.
Thank you. You're right that the process is tortuous and bureaucratic, but in many ways necessarily so. And if you add up the timescales in it, it can add up. Basically, you're talking about a year from idea to implementation. And I can see the point of revisiting as well, but there's one thing in it which I'm really not sure about, which is the informal consultation section, Roman numeral 5, where and I understand it said all residents within the boundary will be balloted on whether they support or do not support, minimum of 51% turnout, minimum of 51% of residents to be in support of the proposal. And apparently, living in the north of the city where we don't have many parking schemes, I'm not familiar with the current detail, but it said that it's currently 30% and 51%. This strikes me as being overly legalistic in terms of when you're looking at an informal consultation, given that this doesn't necessarily lead to automatic implementation. I'm not sure what the franchise is. So you say all residents, but is that all residents on the electoral register, or is it all households? Many households, for instance, would just give one reply rather than 4. Does it include people under the age of 18 who may be car owners? And, in theory, you could get a nonsense where you have 50% of whatever the franchise is come back with 100% support, because the others aren't really that bothered about it. People without cars tend not to reply. And I'm just wondering if that is, I understand getting broad support and that this is a way of trying to ensure that, but this seems a little too precise for that.
Perhaps I can just respond to that, Johnny, by saying that the current scheme calls for 30% support, and if we get that minimum turnout just enough to sort of scratch and get over the that threshold, there will inevitably be a diversion in views between those 30%. And what I'm worried about is that we could get a relatively small number of people, all right, whose opinion could well carry enough weight to get that policy through under the current criteria, when it's crystal clear that there would be probably many more people who held differing views. So what I'm seeking to try and do is to apply, if you like, the old democratic line to say looking for sort of a majority. So that's why I want to see that 51% turnout with a minimum of 51% of people participating, so that we actually have a better chance to be sure in our minds that we have a level of support for a proposal. So that I don't get in a position where I explained with Councillor Dan a moment ago, where one of those existing schemes has, I think it does have the same number of people in support and the same number of people. Yeah, that's what's happened. So, so would we want to implement a scheme on that basis? Probably not. So I'm looking for a means and a method to get us to a position where we can be sure in our minds that we have a majority support for that proposal.
Councillor Morris.
I appreciate that. And I remember in my previous life in a council or elsewhere doing 3 consultations on a one-way system where 100% of people always wanted a one-way system in a particular group of roads, and it always split 50-50 between whether it was clockwise or anti-clockwise. And I think as councillors we're all quite used to that. I understand exactly what you're saying, but this being put down with this sort of mathematical accuracy, I think creates potential problems as opposed to solving a problem that we currently have. This is an informal consultation followed by a 10-week formal consultation in the first instance. Secondly, the level of turnout and the level of support or opposition in that turnout, if I was in the planning committee, I would say would be a material factor which the council, maybe through the cabinet member, whatever, should consider when making the final decision to go ahead or not. It's absolutely relevant. But by laying down a strict numerical threshold, which would immediately kill off anything, I think is to be arithmetic about democracy rather than actually more, more nebulous. I mean, it doesn't, for instance, include, there may be a lot of residents in favour of something which they will go forward, and every single business, every single shop was against it, or vice versa. And I just think this is too exact for the level of flexibility that we need.
Well, I'm sorry to take issue with you, but I mean, yes, it is exact, but I do strongly suggest to members that we wouldn't want to embark on any policy decision and seek to implement any policy if we weren't at least comfortable in our minds that it commanded a measure of support from at least a majority of people. Yeah. So I think we have to have some means of doing just that, and a policy that doesn't do that is, in my view, flawed. So I really do think that we do have to have that process in place. I mean, you picked up quite rightly. Well, who should we actually consult? My personal view is it should be all households. I don't think we should restrict it to those on the electoral roll. I think we want to, and we've been clear in our desire to be an inclusive council, taking everyone with us, and I don't think merely because you're not on the electoral roll you should be excluded from playing a part in the process of the running and the development of the city. Indeed, it might in fact encourage you to get on the roll, and it might actually spark some sort of feeling of getting engagement and there, so that may be a sort of a positive side effect. But I mean, I take the comments around the timescales here, and I mean they are indicative, and clearly, as Mike has said, in terms of the fact find, we will have amongst our databases a significant amount of this information already. So I mean, I see those timeframes as indicative and not necessarily prescriptive, and I do think that where a scheme reaches the position where we've gone through the processes which I've described, those new elements of it, we then more or less follow the current policy, and I think then the whole thing would be able to be speeded up. So I'm not expecting it to take the sort of 40 weeks or virtually the year that we've seen in the past. I do think in everyone's interest we should try to put in place a system that delivers an outcome as quickly as possible.
Councillor Morris, is it a small one?
Yeah, it is, and it's going back to this 51 and 51 thing, which is if you are going to be that precise, you're going to have to define what you mean by a resident, and as opposed to household or adult resident or whatever. That if you're going to get mathematical about it, you're going to have to define your terms. The advantage of having lower thresholds in terms of turnout is precisely that it works, if you like, as an opinion poll, and it is then up to democratic representatives to make decisions based on the information available. This is too mathematical, given the fact that residents within the boundary of a proposed scheme is itself undefined.
Yeah, but equally we need a policy where the democratic representative, i.e. the cabinet member, can take a democratic decision based on sound data. And I think at the end of the day, somebody has got to make a call on this. It's, I think, rightly, it's the appropriate cabinet member. And I think we should have a policy which seeks to provide that cabinet member, whoever he or she may be, either now or any time in the future, with a basis upon which to make an informed decision. And I think, therefore, part of that process has to be that we allow and seek to try to get a majority view to come forward so that we can ensure that we are reflecting the wishes of local people, of businesses and other stakeholders in the area in question. I mean, I'm not sure this is necessarily, we might be perhaps over-engineering this in terms of the scale of this. I mean, in some cases, when we talk about CPZs, we're talking about, 3 roads or something like that. So I think perhaps, we shouldn't run away with the idea we're talking about hundreds upon hundreds of contacts or letters going through doors of every household. It's CPZs tend by their very nature to be somewhat, confined to a particular area where there is perceived to be a problem.
Okay. Just reminding people, we've got Councillor Fletcher, Maven and Penberthy. Can we just try and keep our questions and our answers to a limit, please? I'm just concerned that we have other members who are waiting to come to us. All right, so Councillor Fletcher, please.
Thank you, Chair. In fact, the leaders answered most of my point regarding timescales. Presumably, it's a question of priorities. I mean, if something needs added priority, it can be fast-tracked, and the whole 38 or 40-week process can be telescoped considerably, depending on, whether it's a needs must.
Well, yes, I mean, it could be, but let's be clear. The intention of the policy is to discover information sufficient for a cabinet member to make a decision on in an informed way. I mean, that's basically what it's seeking to do. I mean, how we do that, we can probably talk and debate for, hours if the case and the truth be known. But at the end of the day, what I'm seeking to do is to provide a platform so that an elected member can make a decision.
Okay, Councillor Maven.
Common fault. Yeah, there's a growing thread as we're going through this. I mean, all of us recognise the problems that we got in the city as the city grows, not only from within but from without as well. If you look at, for instance, the traffic problems that are being caused in the east of the city is by commuters coming in all day long and creating parking problems out to the east end. Certainly in my ward, there's the problems with not enough parking available at the hospital and at the science park and areas around that area that's causing major problems for residents. My concern is that as you're addressing this problem now in the way that you're thinking of taking it, where you're saying that let's give in to the motorists and open up, look at where we can have extra parking and such like. Well, you did say that, taking away double yellow lines and issues with that.
I didn't say give in to the motorist.
Well, I interpret it as giving in to the motorist. My problem is then is...
That's your interpretation, of course.
Well, I'm afraid that many of my residents will see it that way. But the point that I'm trying to make is that, what are we actively doing to encourage, if we take away those opportunities and of some protection to residents within their parking areas, what are we doing to encourage people to actually get out the car and get onto the bus? Because certainly with people coming into the city, certainly with people going into those areas of huge work areas, we're not doing anything to encourage more of that by doing this. In fact, we're doing the opposite. We're saying that it's okay, we'll provide parking spaces for you. You no need longer to catch public transport or whatever, or car share.
Councillor Maving, can I ask you to have a look at paragraph 5.2.7, which I actually referred to in my opening remarks, where I said that part of the fact find part of this process would be to look at the availability and accessibility of alternative transport, i.e. public transport services.
I accept that, and I see that in the document. But the problem is that with the things that you've been saying since then, it's a question of, you know, we'll provide more parking for the car.
No, I didn't specifically said that. You're using part of what I said. What I was trying to say, that as part of the fact find, we would also want to look not just at public transport, and I think it's pretty clear 5.2 there, but it may well be that, having looked at the area, it may well be that there are some double yellow lines that have been there for 20 years that, you know, have virtually disappeared, that are clearly superfluous. And I think it is right that we should look at things like double yellow lines from time to time as we go around, because they're not always fit for purpose forever. The circumstances change, people's habits and driving habits change, and this is a dynamic situation that we're talking about in what I hope we'd agree is a dynamic city. We need to make sure that we keep up to date with developments and not just sit there and say, because it worked 20 years ago, let's carry on forever. We have to move forward. Life doesn't stand still.
But anyway, having said that, it's, can I just be clear on one specific point then? Are you saying that all of the schemes that have been done and consulted on now are, by the way, gone?
I've asked Councillor Ricketts to determine the schemes that are currently the existing schemes under the existing policy, to determine those schemes under that policy, so that we can then introduce the new policy. So existing schemes that are in the pipeline will be determined by applying the existing policy.
Okay. Final question, Councillor Penberthy, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's probably a few quick comments rather than questions. Recently in our ward, I say recently, it took us 6 years. We went through all of this sort of good practice. We looked at displacement, which meant we ended up talking about a larger area. We responded to businesses and used school residents. We looked at removing double yellow lines. We looked at how we could create more parking spaces to create traffic calming in order not to have to reduce speed levels. It takes a long time to do that, considerably longer than is outlined in your report. I think you need to think about that in terms of how you do that and the expectations. We got to a point where we thought a win-win, but it didn't satisfy one person, and because it didn't satisfy one person, an alternative was put forward that had objection rather than support, and so no change is happening. What we were trying to do was remove the America's Cup parking restrictions, which now remain in force. So I think, you know, there are some bits here where we have some bits. Some thoughts on amount of available parking. In my own ward, we have lots of garage parking, but that garage parking excludes all the people in those residences from having permits. So if you count the garage parking, you actually aren't necessarily looking at like with like. So you need to, in that list, include excluded premises, because that is important, especially in some of the development areas and conservation areas in the city. You also talk about how you'll do the timings. Recently, I know that you signed off CPZs in Peveril and Drake around the match day parking issues. And growing up in Peveril, I remember there were match day issues all those years ago in Peveril then. However, that isn't between 8 and 6, 5 days a week. That's occasional evenings and weekends. There are CPZs that are requested by residents and businesses to deal with parking at evenings and weekends rather than during typical office hours. So I think here there is an assumption that this is about commuter and other type displacements rather than some of those that might be for leisure type purposes. So I'd ask that you look again at that, because I think that will distort wrongly in different parts of the city. And then I would like to return again to 51% turnout. Recently, I think there should be a donation to the Lord Mayor's charity.
Having a tune as you come to your actual question, because that's where you're coming to, isn't it?
I'm coming to my final comment.
Chair, there were to be no questions. These were comments. I
These
think
are just final comments.
Penberthy did make that clear.
I'd just like to return to the electoral mandate. Recently, a comprehensive and highly successful consultation in the city, according to a report presented to council, had 1.4% of the general population responding to it. Should that mean that on the basis that only 1.4% of the population responded, no action should have been taken? You chose that that was part of an information, not the whole information. If, according to a 51% turnout, the election results in 2016 had been determined, we are talking about mandates, Councillor Fry. And it would be fair to say that no councillor would have been elected that year, because at no ward achieved more than 40% turnout in a local election in a year where there was also a Police and Crime Commissioner election and a referendum. So 51% seems extraordinarily high, and I would ask, if you are going to have a mandate, you look at maybe bringing it back to the 30%.
Okay. Okay. So that gives us... Shh. Shush. I'm speaking. Please be quiet. Okay. That gives us the conclusions of everyone had the opportunity. What the item doesn't give us is any recommendations. So, do we have any recommendations from the floor, please, to go forward? Councillor Dan.
Having been through the East End one, I'm not going to talk about the results of the informal consultation, which you're obviously not informed about, Councillor Boyer, where I can't remember the exact figures, but I can tell you during the informal consultation, well over 50% responded and 70%
What's the recommendation?
But from the recommendation from the informal to the formal consultation, I think we need to look at our communications better during the informal consultation. Because when you get through to the formal consultation, residents suddenly become aware of the impact of either having or not having the CPZ implemented on them, especially residents that may have more than one car or who may not have a car but who have, for instance, family and carers that come and park there, so therefore they still need to get a residence permit but they can't get one for a specific car. Are you with me? And then the residence permits for that non-car owner, if you have someone who has to come and care for you every day, gets very, very expensive. So I think if we're going to look at this, I don't think we should just look at the process. I think we should look at the impact it has on all of the residents, whether they're car owners or not, and how we communicate that impact as far as that informal consultation. Because there's a big difference then between the informal one and the formal one, because that's when residents suddenly wake up and realise what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Dan. Councillor Morris, do you have a recommendation?
I do, but I just need to ask a question first of all. I'm not sure what the process is.
Well, one, you need to put your mic on, and two, we've more or less finished. Go on. What was your question?
The recommendation depends on what the process is for the decision to be made.
Okay,
is this going to the next cabinet or what?
I do believe it's a key decision that the leader can make. I don't know.
This will end up in an executive decision, all right, at the end of the day.
Yeah, but it's come here. Does it get looked at again before you make your decision?
This is pre-decision scrutiny, essentially. This is why I'm bringing it here, to ask for your views and your thoughts around the proposals that I put forward.
Right.
We will listen to what you're now saying. I'm very happy to do that, and very happy that that you feel you would want to make recommendations. But ultimately, we'll end up with an executive decision, which obviously will be published in the same way and be subject to call-in in the same way as all executive decisions are.
Right, because I think there needs to be some serious rethinking around the threshold turnout and threshold majority, because I think that seeks to be far too strict in terms of what needs to go forward. Given that it's going to be an executive decision, I'm not sure how I would propose that. Ordinarily, I would ask for it to come back to a meeting, or because what I don't want to do is come up with a number here and now. If I were forced to, I would say, well, we'll just leave it as it is, and I'm prepared to argue that. That's why I'm a bit worried, not quite sure about what recommendation I'm making.
Okay. Unfortunately, it's not going to come back. So if you put a number, then that's what. But remembering the recommendation doesn't have to be taken into account either, Councillor Morris.
Well,
so.
In which case, I will make the recommendation that there is no change to the informal consultation threshold turnout number in this process. It may be that we want, and the reason for that, if anybody has listened to me, I have made clear, we will have the opportunity. This can be revisited in the future, should it actually cause problems. I think also there is, it is important to bear in mind that even after that process, all that is opening the door. There is a formal consultation process, and there is a cabinet member decision, and that period itself, you know, is 3 months long. So I think there are plenty of times in which, if the cabinet member doesn't think there is majority support for this, it can be stopped. So I think that it is important that we don't change that at the moment. And so if the recommendation is that we don't change that number.
Councillor Pemberthe.
I just wondered whether there could be something put in there that was around thought be given to schemes that are complex because they are in mixed areas where businesses and residents should both have some sort of say in it, and at the moment that is all excluded. And also a process, because at the moment within the scheme it's only residents have a vote, and in a mixed area we should be listening to businesses and schools in a democratic way, if we're going to say that there is a democratic process. But also that we need to think about those CPZs that might be needed for more than just a week or two in terms of a temporary order that we need strategically for the city, which might not meet these criteria, but which we as a city need. And at the moment, they're not included in this. And so we could be challenged if we don't put in there stuff around how that process is handled. And I think it would be useful maybe to have a further discussion around that particular area, and whether in a formal or informal. But thinking about the fact that we're currently still dealing with America's Cup infrastructure, for example, because there is no way of undoing something that's previously been done.
Okay, Councillor Pemberthe, that's noted. Do we have any other recommendations from anybody?
Yeah, I've got one.
Councillor Ball.
Thank you. I agreed with the comments that were made about inclusivity, the number of people in households in a street who should be contributing to the process. And I think you should give consideration to that. But I'm not quite sure how and who should be included. But it wouldn't just be those on the electoral register. Can I comment on anything else? I agreed wholeheartedly with Sudan's recommendation. Johnny Morris, I think you just want to stay where we are, and I think that's a complete waste of time. I cite an example of a road in my ward where we leafleted every house and we spoke on the phone to a number of people that came back, and only a small number were against. The majority were in favour, but the numbers were small. And then when we went to the formal TRO, which was actually costing money, we found we had a vast majority against. So actually the informal process does need to have a high number to stop wasting time. So I can't support it.
All right. Just making it very clear that everybody has said any recommendations they want to. What I have asked is, Ross has not added anything to it. He has just wrote down what people have said. So I shall ask Ross just to read out what people have asked.
All right. Chair, through you, recommendations then currently on the floor. A clear communication strategy for informal consultation process to focus on impact on residents. A recommendation that a threshold for turnout majorities kept at 30%. That mixed areas, businesses, schools and the like should be consulted. And I'm sorry, Councillor Pember, the final point I think was around temporary.
So it was around those schemes that are longer than a very short-term temporary notice that are needed strategically for the city, which might not get resident support, but which we need. So there is a basket of those. It might be about a redevelopment that's going to take 2 or 3 years, and so you effectively put in a CPZ that is longer than a temporary notice. So I think we do need to think about some of those, because there are some major developments around the city that could impact.
Thank you, Councillor Pember. So if we craft something, but it's essentially around the use of the policy in medium-term situations when it comes to CPZs, which are, yeah, okay. So,
okay, Councillor Balls.
and Council Balls consider who should be included in the formal consultation process. Those are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 recommendations from the committee.
Can I have a show of hands? Councillor Morris, go on.
I think it's important to remember Stalin's words that it's not it's the people who count the votes who win elections. So while I take Councillor Ball's point about who is consulted, I want to know how they're going to be counted as well. That's what I mean about the residents versus households situation.
So through you, Chair, this in terms of a recommendation then to the decision maker, when making this decision, it should be included within that policy how the process for counting consultation responses is being dealt with should be within the policy. Right. We'll add that one on.
Okay. Can I have a show of hands for those recommendations that have come from the floor,
One at
please?
a time, please, Chair.
Right. Do you want to read them out one at a time?
Not supporting
Ross,
Councillor
please.
Morris's, I'm sorry.
Well, then that's the only one that
I'll
you
support
need.
the rest.
You will support the rest, but not keep it at 30%.
Yeah, that's
right. So can I have all the recommendations apart from the one that Councillor Morris has said about keeping it to 30%? Can I have a show of hands for all of those recommendations, then, please? Okay. Carried. Can I have the recommendation of keeping the threshold turnout at 30%, please?
Are you voting?
Oh, yeah, I'm certainly going, yeah, but it's like politics.
Those again?
Right, have those against that, please? Thank you very much. That's obviously lost. Okay. Wow.
Do a minority report.
Right, I'm now going to move on to item 7. We have Councillor Nicholson. Can I thank you again? If we take a very 5-minute comfort break, please. Thank you. Can I welcome Councillor Nicholson and your team, and can I wish you all a Happy New Year as well. Do you want us to run over very quickly the report, because I take it everybody has read it? So do you want to just go a quick run over?
Well, I think actually, Councillor Bowie, the report is what it is. Obviously, we're happy to repeat it, but I think it might be better to be led by questions if you're happy to move forward on that basis.
Totally happy with that. So we'll start off with Councillor Penberthy with questions then, please.
Thank you. And I have 4 distinct questions, but they are all relatively quick, I think. The first is the timetable is quick, and obviously this is a lot quicker than the children's services one. I know in some ways it could be seen as simpler, but what we do have in the next 3 months, as well as the hard work on getting this implemented, is the same teams will be going through a Plymouth Plan process, which is going to demand potentially some additional work, and that could grow during the period if the investigation wants more. And I just want assurances that the Plymouth Plan process won't suffer because, and the support to make sure we secure that as the joint local plan won't suffer in order that the same people deliver this. So that's my first question.
Yes, I think I can give that assurance, Chair, to Councillor Penberthy. We're not diverting any resources off of the joint local plan. As members, I think, are aware, the public examination into that starts on the 30th of January. In fact, we're just completing all the statements in response to the 26 pages of inspectors' questions. So, no, we don't intend to divert any resources from the joint local plan. It is a tight timescale, but it does reflect the fact that, of course, we commenced discussions, as the report makes clear, over a year ago now, and I think there's a desire on Torbay's part and on our part to move at pace. There is a lot of work to do, that's true, but clearly it's not on the same scale as children's services. We're getting CMT have agreed as the corporate management team to give the necessary financial, IT and support through Alison in relation to policy issues. So we are getting the support we need to take forward the due diligence, strategic options appraisal. Clearly, as you would have seen from the scope, we're looking at all planning and planning related functions. So it is a tight timescale, but I think I can give you that assurance.
Thank you, Paul. Just before I come back to you, Councillor Penberthy, does anybody else have questions? Councillor Fry?
Thank you, Chair. It says, point number 5, to agree to receive a further report. You've indicated the speed with which it's going. Would you indicate when it's likely that that report will go to Cabinet? Thank you.
27th of March.
Thank you. Very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fry, do you want to just turn your mic off? Thank you. Councillor Morris.
I think Chris had 3 more questions, so he'll probably cover what I'm going to cover, so let him carry on.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Councillor Penberthy then.
Yeah, a couple of areas of risk. We've already got agreements with some of our partners from within teams covered by this, so people like Plymouth Energy Community, where the climate or carbon team will be doing additional stuff. Just want to check that things like that or our own ongoing reputation, so our reputation as a good partner and as someone who still delivers, needs to be continued not only through this process but on an ongoing basis. What happens if Torbay mucks up and doesn't do as suggested, and we end up with egg on our face because it's known that we're there doing stuff, and that could impact on other partnerships the same team holds. So it was more about how we manage that relationship of not directly managing a service because there's another council still responsible for it and running it.
Well, strategically, Councillor Penberthy, I think that's where the collaboration agreement comes in, so the detail. But clearly there's a risk to the reputation of Plymouth City Council when we're dealing with another authority where they're still in control, largely, of the activity. So there is a risk. We can't deny that there is a risk, but we need to try and manage it. You know, there are advantages with entering into this collaboration agreement, but clearly, you know, we're going through a process of evaluating it. We've come today to listen to any concerns you have. But I think you make certainly my greatest concern, you make the point that ultimately we're here to represent the citizens that put us in office and to run the planning service for Plymouth. And whilst we can, in this situation, offer support to Torbay, we need to be paramount in the delivery of an excellent planning service for Plymouth. And that has to be assured through this process. In terms of the resources in the department, you know, Paul answered to your earlier question, you know, resources are available that won't impact on the delivery of service. So there is capacity. So you talk about the climate team. We believe that they can cater for the requirement here. Certainly in answer to the question that Paul previously responded to, you know, directly the development management team, Peter Ford is the senior manager who is ultimately putting in a lot of effort in relation to this as opposed to the local planning, joint local plan team. So we believe we can manage it, but there's a risk and we need to manage that risk.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why I was asking the question. It's about risk management processes, because you know, it's not an opposition. This is a chance for Scrutiny to make sure that we're getting things right. One of the areas I am really concerned is that the termination of this agreement is by unanimous agreement of a board whose membership isn't specified. And we don't know whether there would be anyone potentially appointed to that board who might, for any reason in the future, withhold something that everyone else on the board wanted. So could one person potentially hold a whole termination process up, or could one party want to leave, the other one feel it not in their interests for that party to leave, and so us be stuck in something where either we wanted to get out or Torbay wanted to get out. And so the termination of a board in unanimous agreement seems that it could hold us in the future to something we don't want.
I think it's a very fair point, Councillor Pemberthy. This report is still a report that is being evaluated, so hence the reason it's come today. It needs to go through the Cabinet. Can I actually say that you've hit on an area where I am concerned there's no directly elected representation on that board, and therefore, in terms of how the board makes a decision that binds both authorities, there does need to be elected representation. Whether it's at the board or the recommendation from the board is made by elected councillors. So there is probably going to be some tweaking of this report before it goes through Cabinet and ultimately gets decided by the City Council. So a very fair point. This isn't the final document in my view, and I'm happy to listen to the points you're raising, but there are other points that will be tweaked.
And my final one is one about the process over the next few months. I know you and I might have differing opinions, Patrick, about what May might bring, but there could be a change of control in the council. Could shadows as well as cabinet members be involved in the briefings that are described in here rather than just cabinet members to ensure that if there is a change of control, a new cabinet is fully aware of what's going on? Thank you.
Well, certainly I'm happy, as it's been the case with Children's Services, for there to be a cross-party approach. This is about the council. It's not about a Conservative council. So I'm very happy if that's a recommendation to take it on board, or indeed to take it on board in any case.
Thank you. Councillor Dan.
Which leads very nicely into my question, because my question was about conflict of interest. I haven't read all this paper properly because I was a late substitute, so it might be hidden in here somewhere. But I know that this is about the sort of, is this about planning process, which is, I think the correct word is quasi-judicial, so it's not political. But we do know that when we've had the Plymouth plan, that we have collaborated politically as well. So my question really is, will we get to a position where we could be a conflict of interest when we're doing something spatially in that planning process with Torbay, which could have a detrimental effect on Plymouth? And there's one thing working in collaboration, but if you're delivering as part of the same team, how does that work? How does this conflict of interest happen? Because there will be times when the politics will enter into the planning.
paragraph 5.4, page 35, sets out the provision that in this first phase, which is very much the due diligence strategic options analysis stage, which is why the board that's been referred to really comprises myself and my equivalent in Torbay, along with relevant officers. I take the point about political oversight, and that is something that the board is mindful of. But in relation to planning decision making, it is a quasi-judicial process, as members know. Clearly, and as this paragraph makes absolutely clear, the political decision making and accountability in Torbay must rest, legally and otherwise, with Torbay and Torbay's members generally, and specifically with the planning committee. Similarly, and just for the avoidance of doubt, the same clearly applies to Plymouth and Plymouth's planning committee. There are theoretical conflicts of interest that could arise, but that's really all part of the due diligence process and the strategic options analysis. But there are many examples. There are Plymouth, South Hams, West Devon, when that plan is hopefully adopted later on this year, will be the 13th joint local plan across the country. In other words, there are 13 other combinations of authorities that already exist around the country that have dealt with those issues. So I think this is about, as hopefully the paper makes clear, a willingness and a recognition on Torbay's part when they invited us in to do a service review, sort of akin to a LGA peer review, when they asked us in to assist them with some challenges that they were facing. We then undertook a report in that service review which identified 30 recommendations for improvement around a whole range of issues. They deliberated on that report for a period of time and then made the decision, subsequently endorsed by the Mayor in June of last year, that they wanted to invite Plymouth in to look at options for a form of integrated working over 2 phases. So it is a short period of time. There's a lot of work to do in a short period of time, but that work will inform the future decision that Cabinet needs to make, obviously based upon the analysis that will be done through that. So I don't see that there will be any conflicts of interest, because clearly the decision making, the recommendations from officers in Torbay will remain the recommendations from their planning officers to their planning committee, and similarly in Plymouth.
And then just to reiterate Chris's point, because we raised this as a scrutiny panel for the Children's Services collaborative working, was that there has to be a clear exit strategy, because if there isn't, there will be a cost to the council, without a shadow of a doubt. And this is meant to be cost neutral, and that should be part of the report.
That's in paragraph 5.2, and hence the reason for the reference to the exit provision that was included in the collaboration agreement. Again, I think in the spirit of collaboration, there was a theoretical possibility that there could be someone blocking one of the other parties not being able to take forward, but in the spirit of we're exploring where the opportunities for integrated working may or may not exist. So at this stage, I'm not in a position to advise members whether it's all of those items in that list that's within scope or none of them. It could literally be everything between those 2 extremes. The point of the exercise is to actually see where is there mutual benefit from us working in collaboration. I've indicated in the report where I think there are efficiencies of operation, where there's potentially economies of scale, where there are, I think, some leadership opportunities around a wider agenda in terms of our relationship with government, in terms of speaking with one voice to government on a broader canvas. I think there's many, many opportunities that theoretically are there, but need to be explored through a deep dive, if you will, into each of those areas.
Okay, Councillor Morris, did you want to come in?
Yeah, because I think I've got nothing against this in principle, and but the model is, you know, what we've done with the children's services stuff, and so in that spirit, I think there's a couple of things. Can we make it a formal recommendation that the board includes elected members? I think that'll help Patrick drive it against opposition in his own cabinet. Then, secondly, not just, you know, potential change of control here. There's potential change of control in Torbay, and we know that they're getting rid of the mayoral system. So can I ask, in paragraph 8.3, it says Torbay Council, Plymouth City Council agree to brief the relevant portfolio holders from both authorities together on progress as required through phase 1 to March 2018. Could we make sure that the shadow portfolio holders in both authorities also get that? When we're doing these, and then sort of, finally, when we're doing these sorts of strategic partnership type things with other authorities, it is important, I think, that there's political unanimity as far as possible. Yeah. I appreciate that the timescales involved mean that this is going to be a cabinet decision rather than a council decision. And fair enough if that has to happen. But I think that it is important that the minority groups, oppositions, whatever, in both authorities are fully briefed and generally supportive before anything is sort of signed, sealed and delivered.
Just on those 2 points, Councillor Morris, on the second one first, I think I've already given a commitment that the opposition in Plymouth City Council needs to be involved in the process, and I'm happy that that be relayed to Torbay, but ultimately it's for Torbay to determine their own electoral arrangements. In terms of being part of the working group, I'm not sure sat here today that an elected member necessarily needs to be part of the working group that's going to probably meet on a very regular basis. What I want to explore is the arrangements that the final decisions made by members, not by the working group. So I just need to tease that out with officers. So I think it would be unhelpful if you recommend formally that you instruct me to be a member of the working group, because I just need to tease it out. But I know the spirit that you're coming from, and I'll take that away.
Okay. Thank you, members. Looking at page 29, we have already have the 5 recommendations in front of you. We also got just cross-party working was a recommendation, and also making sure shadow cabinet members, and I think we did say Torbay, but as Councillor Nicholson did say, it depends on Torbay, doesn't it? So do we have an agreement on those recommendations, please? Can I see a show of hands then, please? Sorry? Can you put your mic on, though?
There was also the one that Patrick had picked up on, but the involvement of members in termination should be a recommendation from us, because that was the bit that we were trying to evolve. So that gives Patrick a little bit more power in.
Okay, so that's noted. So after everything's been read out, can I see a show of hands of recommendations, please? Chris, are you voting or not voting? Right, thank you. That's carried. Thank you very much, and may I apologise again to you for keeping you waiting.
Well, thank you for your interest in this topic.
Thank you. Okay, members, we're about to move on to item 8 on the agenda now, please. We'll just give it a couple of minutes while we wait for the cabinet member and his team to come through, and it'll be customer services that we're looking at on agenda 8. Okay, Can I welcome yourselves? Apologies for keeping you waiting. Also, can I wish you a Happy New Year? I know I've already done it, Glenn. I'm probably going to be doing it 1,000 times now. Like I say, we're running majorly over. So if we can just, Glenn, if you just want to give us a very, very brief overview of the report, and then I can go straight into questions, because I know that we have quite a few questions that people want to ask. Right, thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to keep it very short. I just want to say, I'm going to say we've got a fantastic customer service team that actually deal with some very, very difficult issues on a daily basis. I just want to remind not just the committee but all councillors that they're welcome at any point. I think, Sue, you've been along to sat in and listened to calls, and I think Tony Carson has as well. But at any point, anybody is, if you want to contact the team, we can arrange that to come along, and you can actually experience and listen in on the sort of calls that the team deal with on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, up to you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jordan. Questions, please, members. Councillor Dan.
Sorry, felt like this is only half a report. I did spend quite a long time in the contact centre, which is very interesting. So I understand all the issues with waste and the correlation with waste with some of the things you've highlighted here. But I just felt, as you were talking about the whole of performance of the whole contact centre, I'm surprised that you didn't put some of your other performance data in some of your other areas of which you are also responsible and accountable for.
We could have made the report very long. Obviously, we monitor performance on a weekly basis in our performance meetings where we drill down to the minute detail, and we felt actually to give you a broad overview, because this is the first time we've brought performance data to scrutiny, would be the sensible approach, but we can certainly drill down if you want some additional data. We focused on waste because obviously there has been a keen focus through this panel on waste, and we've been working very closely with colleagues in waste to actually address some of those performance issues, which is why we highlighted those, but that wasn't in contrast with any other service. We can give you that same data, and so if you'd like that, I can provide you with a separate report if that's necessary.
Well, I think from a scrutiny perspective, it's important because this data goes back 2 or 3 years, so it's not as if you're just looking at the last year's performance data and comparing current quartiles with last year's quartiles. You're going much further back. But it'd be interesting to know what happens in Revs and Bends when the council tax letters go out, and how many queries you get there, and how you build up, and how the call spikes are, because you're focusing on waste, but there are other services that have equal spikes in performance, and it would be interesting to see how they overlay and they all work together for one. And also from here, it doesn't really give the complexity of some of the other services that you provide. It's quite easy to ring up and say, oh, I've missed a bin. But actually, when you're ringing up about a housing benefit or a crisis intervention, the length of those calls are very different, and you don't glean any of that information from this report.
Just in addition, we have that granularity in the service, and actually what we try to do, as I've alluded to in the report, is we try to maximise our resource. So as from your visit to the call centre, you'll know that a lot of the staff are multi-skilled. That enables us on a day-by-day basis to actually flex the resourcing. And what we've also done is we've updated the resourcing in relation to opportunities across the city. So we have Job Centre Plus work placements. We have Plus placements that have actually been really successful. They go on to fill vacancies through per temps and through permanent vacancies as they arise. So, and we actually also work across sites. So the call centre for Revs and Bends is in New George Street, but we can flow that call and that resource through both locations. So our supervisors and our service manager in the call centre will actually monitor that through the wall boards, and we can move that resource as demand dictates through in the day. It is quite a complex operation, so I can give you pages and pages of data, and what we try to do is actually start bigger picture, and if you want to drill down, we can certainly provide that information, but it was just a snapshot where you can actually go down, but we have got all that data, and the answer rates are equivalent across the whole service. So while we focused on waste, we also maximise and prioritise calls to adult social care and children's, because what we don't want to do is miss any of those more vulnerable customers where we need to prioritise
our call handling. So we do that and manage it. And I would suggest I could either provide you that data or, as Councillor Jordan's
David,
alluded to,
can I interrupt you? I think it's only fair, really. Councillor Dan is subbing for us today, which we're very grateful for. But you did send us with a report that we requested as an overview. And I think, you know, probably through the questions, what we might be better off doing is probably looking at our work programme and taking a bigger picture on this, so we can then divulge further in. But I think it's only fair to say that you did send us a report that we had requested. So, Councillor Dan, are you happy with that answer? I do believe that we probably need to have it come back to on our work programme. Do I have any other questions? Councillor Morris, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's about the first one is about the customer call demand. Looking at the graph and histogram, I've just realised, because it is very tiny, that when it looks at Q3 for the current year, it says to date. So what period is that actually covering?
That is actually covering Q3. So the correct 3-month period.
So that is the whole quarter.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
In which case it does seem very surprising that a quarter-on-quarter change in customer call demand should be about 40%. And the only thing in the report which addresses that, it says, oh, people are going online, but we don't have figures for how many people are going online or making these queries. If I saw the number of people getting in touch with the council through the call centre drop by 40% in 1 quarter, I'd assume something was going wrong, not that this was the success of a policy. So I wondered if you could talk about that a moment.
Sorry, my apologies. The last quarter is actually 2 months of the data. I've just quantified that, so that'll answer it. However, we do get seasonal demand, so at the run up to Christmas, we tend to see demand drop off. And the work we've been doing, one of our most significant services, as you're probably aware, the high volumes are with waste, and we've been working very hard to try and make sure that those calls are dealt with in a more effective way, and we've reduced that failure demand that we used to see. So people, if they couldn't get through, they will ring again. So that actually looks like higher demand than you're actually dealing with.
But, so the answer to my first question was actually that it's 2 months, not 3 months. So bump it up by 50%, you get a call demand figure for Q3 of around 90,000. Which is more on trend, which is right. Hence the first question.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions, please? Councillor Pemberthy.
Yeah, I go into the first stop shop fairly frequently. We hold our ward surgeries in there, so when it's my turn, I'm in there, plus I pop in and out, because it's almost on my doorstep, so it's a useful sort of customer experience when I want to do things. So I frequently use both the switchboard line and the call centre, and the first stop shop. Certainly in the first stop shop, I've noticed that there can be quite a lot of anger in the queues, especially around the cash machines, and that isn't handled particularly well, and people have left sort of muttering under their breath and talking about the council not working for them anymore. And that's not, if it was just one-off, I'd say fair enough, it's one-off. It's happened on a number of occasions. So I think there are some issues around how we are handling the conflict of cash machines not being available if cash machines are not going to be available, because clearly people, and they tend to be older people, or people with mobility issues who might find dealing with WH Smiths next door not a pleasant experience, and actually I find dealing with WH Smiths not a pleasant experience. I tend to avoid it if I can, but actually getting upstairs isn't particularly easy. So there is something, I think, about how some of this is perceived at point of contact. I know quite frequently when I ring, I ring from my own phone number because members of the public contact me on my own phone number. It's the one I've been using for 6 years. I don't have a council phone. I can wait up to 20 minutes to actually get to talk to someone fairly frequently, and I assume that that's what's going to be the case because that's the norm. Now, I might get caught up in a couple of choices during that process, but either I'm being the exception that proves the rule, that this number is spotted and put in a call just so that I'm always in a call queue, or there are a lot of people holding for quite a long time listening to wait to get through. And that doesn't seem to have improved at all over recent years. It always seems to have been around that. And certainly I'm not seeing at the front desk some of the resolution you'd like to see. And of course, if you're in a queue, other people are picking up that negativity as well. It could be worth thinking about, if this is a difficult position, let's move those people out of the queue to a table somewhere else to explain to them, so that we're taking some of the angst away from members of the whole public. Because when I read this, it's not necessarily what I've experienced and what I've seen as good customer service. So whilst the figures might be true, I think there are probably some bits and pieces around the edges that make it less good of an experience for some members of the public.
I have to say I tend to disagree with respect. We're not seeing the number of complaints go up. Yes, I appreciate we try and we should take people away if they're in a queue and they are anxious, and we try to do that wherever possible, and we're supported by concierge there. In respect of the call answer rate and calls being answered in 20 minutes, I just refer you to the table where actually the average speed of answer now across all the services is just over a minute. And if you compare that with the 101, we're not an emergency service, and when at times of peak demand, unfortunately some of our customers will have to wait a short time. I don't think waiting over a minute is a lengthy period of time, and as I alluded to earlier, we try and resource it so that we prioritise our most needy customers. So we will resource up on adult social care and children's before calls on waste if we get that peak in demand. But it's very difficult to predict. There are certain times where we can predict it, when we're sending out reminders on revenues and benefits, but other times we literally have no reason to understand the demand as it comes in, and we try and flex the resource. Otherwise I'll have resources sitting around when they're not being properly utilised, and that wouldn't be the best use of council taxpayers' money.
And can I just add to that, Chair? I'm going to say I get the figures on a weekly basis, and that isn't. I'm going to say, and this is I see is a true record of what I'm seeing on a weekly basis. Because if there was that sort of constant wait, I think unfortunately, Chris, you've probably just been unlucky on a couple of occasions when you've been phoning in. But because I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I'm going to say on average, I'm going to say that isn't what's happening. And also reference the cash point machine. I guess I went round and I saw the staff before Christmas, and unfortunately I was rushed because I spent longer at the contact centre than I should have done, because just chatting with the staff there. And that was the one question I did ask, was it causing any problems? And the response I got was, well, yeah, you get one or two people who seemed a bit miffed. But when you actually point out that actually they can just go next door and pay in the post office next door, they seem fine with it. It hasn't been a major issue, as some people have tried to think it is. It is something that actually the staff are dealing with when it does occur. But in the nature of the work that we're doing, we will always get people who will come in who are frustrated about many of an issue.
Okay, Councillor Jordan, can I just move on? I think we've all took your point. Councillor Churchill, you were trying to come in, weren't you?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I guess that Councillor Penberthy and I have something in common. We must be both unlucky, because I equally wait 20 minutes on the phone, and I've also experienced some disgruntled customers in the queue. Just to clear up on the 1 minute, please, Dave. When you say most calls are answered in 1 minute, is that answered the query, or is that diverted to an option within 1 minute?
that's actually 1 minute to get to an agent. So that's when you've heard the key phone maps, where we try to push people towards our digital channel, because obviously we've got to drive to get digital channel being used. So that's when they actually are answered by an agent.
I'll keep trying, thank you.
Councillor Mayburn.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to come in there as well, because I've experienced exactly the same thing. Maybe it's because I'm called Chris as well. But, you know, I have experienced a time when I've had to wait inordinate amounts of times on the phone, particularly when people say to me, here you are, you try it, and try and phone from people's addresses. But I have to say that one of the things that I've picked up recently is people who are saying to me that they're actually being hung up on when they speak to the call centre. They're being disconnected totally, and so why would that happen in a call centre?
On occasion, we do have some quite irate customers, and we try to deal with those, and the skills that the customer advisors have got are pretty good. On occasion, if somebody's being rude and swearing at us, we do advise customer advisors either to escalate it to a team leader or a service manager, or on the odd occasion we do have to terminate the call because some of these people can be quite angry. But on the whole, that is not the case. We certainly don't hang up without warning people. We'll give them a warning if they would like to deal with us in a professional manner and talk to us politely. But if they refuse to do that, then we do advise the advisors they can terminate the call in those few and far between exceptions.
Chair, I think, you know, in all respect to Mr Saunders, what I'm saying is that people are being disconnected before it's answered. The phone rings for a while and then just hang up and it's being disconnected.
I take on board your point, and I'm not saying that hasn't happened, but we've looked at that and we've tried to investigate that issue, and we haven't found any issues that are causing that to happen.
We do have the ability to record. We record all our calls. So if you have customers or people you're in contact with, if we've got their phone number, we can actually track that call and listen to what's happened, and that's easier to deal with. Some of these calls may be intermittent faults, but if we could track it back and you could help us with that, we'll certainly investigate it on each occasion.
Chair, I didn't want to raise this today, but that happened recently. I put in a complaint about the way that somebody had been treated. And when she phoned me back the second time after speaking to somebody that contacted her back, she didn't want to progress it further because, in her words, she was bullied worse the second time than she was the first time.
Okay. Councillor Dan.
I will ask the question because does the system ever just become overloaded? There was a couple of examples, and we can find out the calls, because I know who made the calls over Christmas, where they wanted to be put through to highways to report floods and stuff, and it just wouldn't go through. It just got cut off.
Over Christmas, we did identify on day one, because bear in mind there was an organisational shutdown. There was a decision for the organisation to shut down. And what should have happened, we should have routed to the out-of-hours map, which basically goes through to the CCTV room, which happens normally when we're shut. There was a fault that was identified on the Tuesday we started back, and that was put right within a couple of hours. So that option was then rectified so that people would have the original out-of-hours map. And we've since identified that there was a process that wasn't carried out, and I can only apologise to any customer that inadvertently couldn't get through. But if they did hang on, they would have got through to the contact centre that was open for emergency adult social care and children's care calls anyway.
Okay. Thank you very much for your questions. Thank you very much for your time, and apologies again for keeping you waiting. Members, there is no recommendations. It was just a report really for questions. So we're going to move on to item number 9. Okay, so again, this report is for noting. So I've just been informed that we've not had any members have asked for any officers for attendance. So are we, I take it item 9 we are happy with? Councillor Morris?
Just one thing which doesn't need an officer here, but if the feedback could be made to the officer that, just like last time, the Woolwell to the George capital scheme is listed under the Eastern Corridor capital investments, which I expect is just a mistake of copying and pasting the spreadsheet wrong.
No, we've moved it.
Or they've moved it. Or it's a really, really cunning accounting trick to get money out of the government that we shouldn't have. But could somebody record that and just feed back to the author of the report that that's there?
Okay, that's noted. Thank you very much, Councillor Morris. Yeah, Councillor Pember.
Once again, one that didn't need officers here. I know, because it made it difficult for us as cabinet members last time, that we had moved to a monthly performance and budget reporting process to the old management board, which meant that we could be called up more frequently and we were more answerable. And I notice we've now moved back to quarterly, which means that we're seeing stuff substantially later, in fact, after it's been through council. So I wondered whether we might be able to move back to monthly reporting, which means that we're able to more actively assist in scrutiny of issues when they're live rather than when they are substantial. You know, you wouldn't run a business on quarterly reports, you'd run it on weekly and monthly reports.
Through you, Chair. That's been the case now for over 12 months. This panel and the health panel have made representations several times to both the head of finance and the portfolio holder, who have told us they won't be provided monthly reports and it will only be quarterly.
I think it can still be minuted that we're disappointed that it is so far out of, you know, we're scrutiny, we're not the executive, and to be quite honest, as a chair of trustees of a charity, I would not expect to see quarterly reports this far in arrears. I'd expect to be seeing them on a monthly basis. So I think it's good practice, and there's no reason why the council shouldn't be operating in a good practice environment, and minuting that is no harm.
Okay. I'm being told by Councillor Boyle it was well spotted, Councillor Morris.
Because it's actually there. It's twice.
It is twice it's there. Okay. Okay, so if everybody is happy...
It's certainly looking healthier.
If everybody's happy with item 9, can we move on to item 10 on the agenda, please, which is the corporate plan. Again, this is for noting only, unless anyone has anything they would like to raise. No? All right, so we're going to move on now to item 11, which is our tracking. And I do believe we're doing okay. Yeah. Okay, I'm being told there's just a couple of things for following up, but we are on target for our tracking. So I'm going to move on to item 12, which is the last item on the agenda. Okay, so we only have one meeting, like I started our meeting off, to explain that we only have one meeting left in March. I would recommend that customer services, when on the work programme, I do believe there is probably a lot more digging that we need to look into, a bit more of a thorough. And what I would say is after today, we've had some really interesting topics today, and I do believe we probably do need that little bit longer for everybody to be allowed to have their questions. So I'm going to recommend that customer services go on. We already have a waste update, the library review, staff survey as well. Do I have an agreement with that, please? Can I have a show of hands for the agreement, please? Thank you very much. I have no further business. Councillor Morris, you're waving at me. What would you like? Would you like to put your mic on as well, please?
Thank you. Yeah, the Universal Credit Select Committee review in March. So that's separate from the next scrutiny. So that's that. Second, have we scheduled a date? Has there been any progress in organising anything about that yet? Because I do not want that to slip
Okay, I'm being advised that we have budget scrutiny on the 18th and 19th of January. They would like to go through that first and then be able to get out a date for universal credits. We also do have another select committee as well on that work programme, in case anyone's missed it. It's the Gypsies and the Travellers that my Vice Chair has requested. So we'll get some dates in pretty quickly. I know we've all got a very busy year ahead of us, some more than others. It's also Perda. Okay, I have no other business. Thank you very much. The meeting is closed.